The wind carried a whisper through the derelict streets of Loma Perdida, a plea so fragile it might have been a dream. Marisol Ortega, her skirts dust-streaked and threadbare, knelt beside the weathered boards of a shuttered storefront, clutching a faded rag doll to her chest. The doll's button eyes, one mismatched and scarred with soot, glimmered in the failing light as if holding its own secret. "Please," Marisol whispered, her voice trembling on the edge of silence, "buy my rag doll. Ma's dying." She felt the words settle in the hollows of her throat like stones, heavy and final. The day had begun with the same sun-caked indifference that marked every morning in this forgotten corner of the world. Yet nothing had been ordinary since her mother's fevered cough rattled through their tiny adobe home before dawn. Her heart still pounded with the memory of trampled blankets, of her mother's labored breathing, and of the tremor in her own hands as she sewed the rag doll's last missing button, an act of love stitched with desperation. Marisol's breath came in, tremulous half-sobs. She rose, straightening her shoulders as she faced the dusty street. Loma Perdida was crumbling, its grandeur buried under layers of neglect and time. Boarded windows gaped like empty eye sockets, and faded wooden signs creaked on rusted hinges. Only a handful of souls remained: the barkeep who never asked questions, the old healer with rattling bones, and the nameless drifters whose spurred boots raised clouds of suspicion wherever they wandered. She had never thought she'd end up here, hawking a rag doll made from remnants of her mother's quilt, of her own childhood clothes scraps of cotton and wool dyed with memories of laughter and lullabies. But when the healer's herbs ran out and the medicine chest lay bare, she had no choice. The rag doll was all she could offer, a token of hope for a stranger, a lifeline for her mother. From the corner of her eye, Marisol spotted him, alone. Figure striding down the street, tall and silent, hat brim low. Copper buttons on his coat caught the dying light, and his boots trampled the dust with deliberate calm. She felt her throat close. He stopped a few paces away, as though sensing her plea before she spoke. The rag doll trembled in her grip. He did not smile. He did not speak. He simply studied her, eyes unreadable as the sea at midnight. "Ma's dying," she said again, voice cracking with urgency. The rag doll's patched legs swung limply as she held it out. "Please." He reached out, just above the doll but not touching. His hand hovered for a heartbeat so fragile it threatened to shatter the moment entirely. Marisol's pulse thundered in her ears. She dared not blink. Then he nodded, as if accepting a fate he could neither change nor escape. He took a coin from his pocket, a single heavy gold piece, and pressed it into her palm. The weight of it felt almost cruel in her small hand. Marisol swallowed, voice gone. She stammered, "Thank you, sir." His dark eyes softened for the barest instant. "Take care of her," he said, gesturing toward the doll. "A piece of the heart can heal what medicine cannot." Then, as swiftly as he had appeared, he turned and continued down the street, disappearing into the shadows of broken doorways. Pain blossomed in Marisol's chest. Wonder, gratitude, and a hollow ache that threatened to crack her spirit. She watched his retreating back, wishing she could call him back, ask his name. But the wind had already whisked his words away. She stood frozen, the coin burning hot in her palm, the rag doll cradled against her heart like a promise. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and ashen grays. Loma Perdida exhaled, its silence swallowing the final traces of daylight. Marisol pressed the coin into the folds of her skirt and hurried down the alley toward her mother's house. Inside, the small room was dim, lit only by a flickering lantern that cast dancing shadows on the cracked walls. Her mother lay curled on a pallet of straw, sweat-soaked and pale as a ghost. Marisol's breath caught at the sight of her, so fragile, so small, so frighteningly still. "Ma," she whispered, kneeling by the bed and brushing the damp strands of hair from her mother's forehead. "I sold the doll." "Here, Ma." She pressed the coin into her mother's hand. Her mother's fingers closed weakly around the metal, and, for a heartbeat, Marisol believed she might speak. But the woman's breath hitched and faded, and her eyelids fluttered shut as the lantern guttered low. Marisol clutched her mother's hand, tears silently tracing lines down her cheeks. She pressed her face to the thin mattress, voice muffled as she whispered a prayer to a world that felt too quiet, too vast, and too empty. Outside, distant hoofbeats rose on the wind, a reminder that the world beyond Loma Perdita still turned, indifferent to the tragedies that unfolded in its forgotten corners. Marisol closed her eyes, holding her mother's hand until the world slipped away into darkness. When she woke, dawn's pale light filtered through the cracks in the wooden shutters. The rag doll lay on the floor beside her, and the gold piece glinted softly on the table. Marisol rose, determined, though her heart felt leaden with grief. There was work to do, a town to traverse, a future to grasp through tears and dust. For in a place forgotten by time, where trouble rode in on the wind and legends faded slower than scars, Marisol Ortega was about to discover that even the smallest plea could awaken something far greater than despair. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Marisol Ortega and Lucas Cruz pressed onward toward Isabel Montez's cabin as the last glimmers of daylight retreated behind jagged peaks. The fever in Marisol's mind churned like the roiling storm clouds gathering above them. Her mother's final breath still echoed in the hollow chambers of her memory. Yet every pulse, every labored inhale pushed her forward. They were inches away from the slender promise of healing. They climbed the narrow path that wound around a craggy outcrop, the horse's hooves slipping on loose scree. Lucas glanced back, so often his neck must have ached, eyes searching for any sign of the red spur's return. Marisol clutched the rag doll tightly, its tattered dress sticking to her palm like a second skin. Though battered, the doll held its button eyes aloft as if determined to offer comfort one more time. At the cabin door, Isabel Montez stood in the threshold, knobby arms crossed, face carved with both skepticism and concern. She had seen the ragged travelers before, wounded men, broken dreams, desperate pleas for her rare remedies. Tonight, her loom sat unattended. Skeins of yarn snapped like brittle hope in a forgotten hearth. "You're late," Isabel said, voice roughened by years of healer's smoke and whispered prayers. Her eyes swept from Lucas's worried face to Marisol's ashen cheeks. "And unwise to come at twilight. They've been acting bolder." Marisol offered the coin with trembling fingers. Isabel's gaze flicked to it as though expecting it to dissolve into dust. The old woman's voice softened. "A mother's life isn't cheap, child. May it buy what your heart needs." Inside, the cabin was a sanctuary of light and herb-scented warmth. Shelves heaved under jars of dried roots. Vials of tinctures glowed like embers behind stained glass. Isabel moved with deliberate care, her every motion steeped in grace despite her stooped frame. She filled a bowl with steaming water infused with mint and yarrow, then crushed handfuls of lavender and poppy petals into a fine paste. All the while, Marisol's heart pounded so loudly she feared it might drown out the healer's instructions. "You'll need to sit with her through the night," Isabel instructed, her lined face as calm as dawn. "Don't let her slip away. This brew can hold her fever at bay, but it can't heal a broken spirit. Keep her mind tethered to hope." Marisol nodded, the coin forgotten in Isabel's crusted palm. Lucas offered to carry supplies back to the horses. Outside, the wind whipped against the walls, carrying distant echoes of hoofbeats lost among the pines. When they reached the Ortega homestead, night had fallen in a blanket of quiet dread. The moon hung low and wan, its silver light pooling on the straw pallet where her mother lay. Marisol's breath caught. Her mother's chest rose and fell, slower now, as if each breath weighed more than the last. Marisol dipped a cloth into the steaming brew. The scent of mint burned against the stench of sickness. She pressed the cloth to her mother's fevered brow and whispered, "Stay with me, Ma. Please stay. I have your doll. I have these herbs, and I have Lucas. We won't let you go." Her mother's eyelids flickered. For a moment, her gaze found Marisol's, and Marisol felt a spark like a dying ember kindling beneath ash. Then the flutter passed, and her mother's eyes closed once more. Lucas sat on a splintered stool, offering water and reassurance in quiet tones. Marisol's tears fell into her lap as she watched the steam swirl around her mother's pallid face. Hours blurred. The wind howled through cracks in the walls as though seeking to tear hope from the fragile dwelling. Marisol stayed by the pallet, heart thrumming to every creak of floorboards, every groan of the wind. Just when her exhaustion nearly swallowed her, Isabel appeared at the window, silhouette dark against the moonlit sky. "She lives," the healer whispered, voice nearly lost in the gale. "But they're coming. You'll have to leave." Now Marisol's heart stopped. "Leave her?" Isabel's eyes were clear but steely. "They've tracked you. The red spurs know a girl with coin rides with healing herbs. They won't just take your money, they'll take everything." Marisol weighed her mother's fragile form against the threat beyond the door. The rag doll, once a symbol of hope, now lay at the foot of the pallet, its button eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. "We protect her," Marisol said, voice steadying. "Whatever it costs," Isabel nodded once. "Then you fight as I taught you." The wind rattled the shutters as hoofbeats pounded the earth outside, an army of shadows riding on vengeance. Lucas stood by the door, rifle in hand, eyes fixed on the shape of the approaching riders. Marisol rose, hands shaking, heart aflame with fierce resolve. She lifted the rag doll and pressed it against her chest. "For Ma." And as the door splintered, under the first blows, the rag doll's mismatched button eyes caught the lantern's glow. In that fractured reflection, Marisol saw not the battered child who begged for mercy, but a woman forged in loss and determination, willing to face the dark to reclaim the light. Outside, the red spurs waited in the black veil of night. There, leader Silas Cullen dismounted, rifle trained on the cabin's door. He sneered, twisted smile splitting his face. "Come out, Ortega. Hand over the girl and the herbs or I set fire to the whole shack." Marisol steadied her breath, clutching the rag doll like a talisman. The feverish memory of her mother's final gasp urged her forward, guiding her trembling hand toward her own rifle. Lucas's voice was a low growl. "Mizzo, get down." But Marisol stood, rag doll raised high. "You want her? You'll have to go. Through me." Silas laughed, harsh and hollow, then raised his rifle. "Fine by me. I love a pretty fight." The first shot shattered the night's calm. Marisol felt the wind rip past her ear as the bullet tore through the doorframe. Splinters rained down. She gripped her rifle with white-knuckled determination, eyes locked on the splintered wood, and then, in a moment that seemed to twist time, the rag doll's button eyes gleamed with defiance. Mariso El Ortega inhaled sharply, her mother's lullabies echoing in her mind, and pulled the trigger. The cabin exploded in flame and thunder, and in that burst of light, Marisol saw the shape of a horse rearing outside, the silhouette of the stranger who had bought her doll, riding toward the inferno. As if summoned by the desperate plea of a dying mother's child, her heart thundered with the promise of a new ally or a new danger as she realized the true price of her mother's salvation was only beginning to be paid. Mama, Iso El Ortega, stood at the threshold of her mother's small adobe home, the early light of dawn unraveling the ragged edges of night. The coin lay heavy in her palm, cold and certain, the promise of healing or perhaps only a cruel tease. Behind her, The rag doll lay abandoned on the threadbare mat where her mother had drawn her last breath. For a moment, Marisol could not move. The world beyond the shuttered windows felt vast and unwelcoming, each breath a blade of chill air slicing through her resolve. But she could not linger. The healer's cabin lay some miles to the east, beyond the cracked wagon tracks and the hollow outskirts of Loma Perdida. Word was that old Isabel Montez still carried herbs potent enough to slay fever, or so Marisol prayed. She adjusted the shawl around her shoulders, the coarse wool rasping against her bare arms. With steadying breath, she tucked the coin into the pocket of her faded skirt, then scooped the rag doll into her arms. It was heavy with memories, her mother's lullaby in every stitch, her childhood sorrow and hope woven into its seams. She would not abandon it. Not yet. Down the alley, the saloon's bedraggled sign creaked. The broken spur, the lone barkeep tended to the early morning hush, wiping down splintered stools. Marisol paused, uncertainty flickering in her chest. She had nowhere else to go, save the dusty road east, but rumor had it that after nightfall, the road became prey to bandits and worse. A voice called out from behind her, "Marisol?" She turned. Lucas Cruz, the old rancher's son, leaned against the peeling doorframe, his wide brim casting shadows over a face heavy with concern. He had grown up alongside Marisol, both children of hardship, their laughter scarce and precious. "You're heading for Montez's?" he asked, voice low. Emma Larisol nodded, smoothing the doll's frayed hem. "Ma's fever won't break without her potions." Lucas pushed off from the wall, stepping into the loose gravel. "I can ride with you partway. The ridge past the sugar pines, it's safer together." She hesitated, pride and fear warring in her chest. But as she glanced at the doll's button eyes, she remembered her mother's rasping plea, "Don't let go, Mizzo. Not now." "Thank you," Marisol said, voice barely more than a breath. He offered her the reins of his spotted mare, and together they set out. The first mile was silent, the only sound the rattle of harness and the mare's hooves. Marisol clutched the rag doll to her chest as though it were the sole anchor holding life together. Lucas watched her from the corner of his eye, the way her jaw clenched, her eyes fixed on some distant horizon. He knew better than to speak of the fever or her mother's death. Words felt brittle and unsatisfying. At the edge of town, the broken fence of the Ortega homestead gave way to scrub and cactus. The road pitched upward toward the ridge, and the air grew thinner as they climbed. Patches of snow lingered in shaded hollows, a reminder of winters that seemed to last a lifetime here. Lucas halted at a stand of sugar pines, his breath steamed in the chill as he unfastened a small leather pouch from his belt. "These," he said, offering the pouch to Marisol, "should stanch bleeding and fever too, in a pinch. My pa taught me how to mix them." Marisol Ortega and Lucas Cruz pressed onward toward Isabel Montez's cabin as the last glimmers of daylight retreated behind jagged peaks. The fever in Marisol's mind churned like the roiling storm clouds gathering above them. Her mother's final breath still echoed in the hollow chambers of her memory. Yet every pulse, every labored inhale pushed her forward. They were inches away from the slender promise of healing. They climbed the narrow path that wound around a craggy outcrop, the horse's hooves slipping on loose scree. Lucas glanced back, so often his neck must have ached, eyes searching for any sign of the red spur's return. Marisol clutched the rag doll tightly, its tattered dress sticking to her palm like a second skin. Though battered, the doll held its button eyes aloft as if determined to offer comfort one more time. At the cabin door, Isabel Montez stood in the threshold, knobby arms crossed, face carved with both skepticism and concern. She had seen the ragged travelers before, wounded men, broken dreams, desperate pleas for her rare remedies. Tonight, her loom sat unattended, skeins of yarn snapped like brittle hope in a forgotten hearth. "You're late," Isabel said, voice, roughened by years of healer's smoke and whispered prayers. Her eyes swept from Lucas's worried face to Marisol's ashen cheeks, and unwise to come at twilight, they've been acting bolder. Marisol offered the coin with trembling fingers. Isabel's gaze flicked to it as though expecting it to dissolve into dust. The old woman's voice softened. A mother's life isn't cheap, child. May it buy what your heart needs. Inside, the cabin was a sanctuary of light and herb-scented warmth. Shelves heaved under jars of dried roots. Vials of tinctures glowed like embers behind stained glass. Isabel moved with deliberate care, her every motion steeped in grace despite her stooped frame. She filled a bowl with steaming water infused with mint and yarrow, then crushed handfuls of lavender and poppy petals into a fine paste. All the while, Marisol's heart pounded so loudly she feared it might drown out the healer's instructions. "You'll need to sit with her through the night," Isabel instructed, her lined face as calm as dawn. "Don't let her slip away. This brew can hold her fever at bay, but it can't heal a broken spirit. Keep her mind tethered to hope." Marisol nodded, the coin forgotten in Isabel's crusted palm. Lucas offered to carry supplies back to the horses. Outside, the wind whipped against the walls, carrying distant echoes of hoofbeats lost among the pines. When they reached the Ortega homestead, night had fallen in a blanket of quiet dread. The moon hung low and wan, its silver light pooling on the straw pallet where her mother lay. Marisol's breath caught. Her mother's chest rose and fell, slower now, as if each breath weighed more than the last. Marisol dipped a cloth into the steaming brew. The scent of mint burned against the stench of sickness. She pressed the cloth to her mother's fevered brow and whispered, "Stay with me, Ma. Please stay. I have your doll, I have these herbs, and I have Lucas. We won't let you go." Her mother's eyelids flickered. For a moment, her gaze found Marisol's, and Marisol felt a spark like a dying ember kindling beneath ash. Then the flutter passed, and her mother's eyes closed once more. Lucas sat on a splintered stool, offering water and reassurance in quiet tones. Marisol's tears fell into her lap as she watched the steam swirl around her mother's pallet. Face-hours blurred. The wind howled through cracks in the walls as though seeking to tear hope from the fragile dwelling. Marisol stayed by the pallet, heart thrumming to every creak of floorboards, every groan of the wind. Just when her exhaustion nearly swallowed her, Isabel appeared at the window, silhouette dark against the moonlit sky. "She lives," the healer whispered, voice nearly lost in the gale. "But they're coming. You'll have to leave, now." Marisol's heart stopped. "Leave her?" Isabel's eyes were clear but steely. "They've tracked you. The Red Spurs know a girl with coin rides with healing herbs. They won't just take your money, they'll take everything." Marisol weighed her mother's fragile form against the threat beyond the door. The rag doll, once a symbol of hope, now lay at the foot of the pallet, its button eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. "We protect her," Marisol said, voice steadying. "Whatever it costs," Isabel nodded once. "Then you fight as I taught you." The wind rattled the shutters as hoofbeats pounded the earth outside, an army of shadows riding on vengeance. Lucas stood by the door, rifle in hand, eyes fixed on the shape of the approaching riders. Marisol rose, hands shaking, heart aflame with fierce resolve. She lifted the rag doll and pressed it against her chest. "For Ma." And as the door splintered, under the first blows, the rag doll's mismatched button eyes caught the lantern's glow. In that fractured reflection, Marisol saw not the battered child who begged for mercy, but a woman forged in loss and determination, willing to face the dark to reclaim the light. Outside, the Red Spurs waited in the black veil of night. Their leader, Silas Cullen, dismounted, rifle trained on the cabin's door. He sneered, twisted smile splitting his face. "Come out, Ortega. Hand over the girl and the herbs or I set fire to the whole shack." Marisol steadied her breath, clutching the rag doll like a talisman. The feverish memory of her mother's final gasp urged her forward, guiding her trembling hand toward her own rifle. Lucas's voice was a low growl. "Mizzo, get down!" But Marisol stood, rag doll raised high. "You want her? You'll have to go. Through me." Silas laughed, harsh and hollow, then raised his rifle. "Fine by me. I love a pretty fight." The first shot shattered the night's calm. Marisol felt the wind rip past her ear as the bullet tore through the doorframe. Splinters rained down. She gripped her rifle with white-knuckled determination, eyes locked on the splintered wood, and then, in a moment that seemed to twist time, the rag doll's button eyes gleamed with defiance. Mar ISO L Ortega inhaled sharply. Her mother's lullabies echoing in her mind, and pulled the trigger. The cabin exploded in flame and thunder, and in that burst of light, Marisol saw the shape of a horse rearing outside, the silhouette of the stranger who had bought her doll. Riding toward the inferno, as if summoned by the desperate plea of a dying mother's child, her heart thundered with the promise of a new ally or a new danger, as she realized the true price of her mother's salvation was only beginning to be paid. Mar ISO L Ortega stood at the threshold of her mother's small adobe home, the early light of dawn unraveling the ragged edges of night. The coin lay heavy in her palm, cold and certain, the promise of healing or perhaps only a cruel tease. Behind her, the rag doll lay abandoned on the threadbare mat where her mother had drawn her last breath. For a moment, Marisol could not move. The world beyond the shuttered windows felt vast and unwelcoming, each breath a blade of chill air slicing through her resolve. But she could not linger. The healer's cabin lay some miles to the east, beyond the cracked wagon tracks and the hollow outskirts of Loma Perdida. Word was that old Isabel Montez still carried herbs potent enough to slay fever, or so Marisol prayed. She adjusted the shawl around her shoulders, the coarse wool rasping against her bare arms. With steadying breath, she tucked the coin into the pocket of her faded skirt, then scooped the rag doll into her arms. It was heavy with memories, her mother's lullaby in every stitch, her childhood sorrow and hope woven into its seams. She would not abandon it. Not yet. Down the alley, the saloon's bedraggled sign creaked. The broken spur, the lone barkeep tended to the early morning hush, wiping down splintered stools. Marisol paused, uncertainty flickering in her chest. She had nowhere else to go, save the dusty road east, but rumor had it that after nightfall, the road became prey to bandits and worse. A voice called out from behind her. "Marisol?" She turned. Lucas Cruz, the old rancher's son, leaned against the peeling doorframe, his wide brim casting shadows over a face heavy with concern. He had grown up alongside Marisol, both children of hardship, their laughter scarce and precious. "You're heading for Montez's?" he asked, voice low. Marisol nodded, smoothing the doll's frayed hem. "Ma's fever won't break without her potions." Lucas pushed off from the wall, stepping into the loose gravel. "I can ride with you part way. The ridge past the sugar pines, it's safer together." She hesitated, pride and fear warring in her chest. But as she glanced at the doll's button eyes, she remembered her mother's rasping plea, "Don't let go, Mizzo, not now." "Thank you," Marisol said, voice barely more than a breath. He offered her the reins of his spotted mare, and together they set out. The first mile was silent, the only sound the rattle of harness and the mare's hooves. Marisol clutched the rag doll to her chest, as though it were the sole anchor holding life together. Lucas watched her from the corner of his eye, the way her jaw clenched, her eyes fixed on some distant horizon. He knew better than to speak of the fever or her mother's death. Words felt brittle and unsatisfying. At the edge of town, the broken fence of the Ortega homestead gave way to scrub and cactus. The road pitched upward toward the ridge, and the air grew thinner as they climbed. Patches of snow lingered in shaded hollows, a reminder of winters that seemed to last a lifetime here. Lucas halted at a stand of sugar pines, his breath steamed in the chill as he unfastened a small leather pouch from his belt. "These," he said, offering the pouch to Marisol, "should stanch bleeding and fever too in a pinch. My peyo taught me how to mix them." The acrid stench of smoke clawed at Marisol Ortega's lungs as she and Lucas burst through the shattered doorway of the Ortega homestead. Ember-bright tongues licked along the rotting timbers of the cabin, hungrily devouring every last scrap of straw and wood. Marisol's heart thundered in her chest. Her mother's pale form lay within the haze of heat and suffocating gray, and beside her, the rag doll's button eyes stared up at the warping ceiling. "Ma!" Marisol threw herself forward, arms outstretched, but Lucas's firm grip on her shoulder stopped her. Outside, Silas Cullen's mocking laughter thudded against the burning walls as the red spurs dismounted, boots crunching over smoldering boards. "Let her come out," Silas called, voice leering, "or I drop her in the flames." Lucas pressed a gun into Marisol's hand. "Stay behind me. We hold them off until the door collapses." Through the flickering barrier of flame, Marisol glimpsed her mother's breathing, shallow and ragged. She felt the rag doll's fabric brush against her cheek, the whisper of her mother's lullaby soft as moth wings. She squared her shoulders, raising the rifle. The world narrowed to the ragged outline of horsemen beyond the door, steel shining hotter than the inferno between them. She did not hesitate. She squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, deafening in the enclosed space. Silas's hat flew from his head, and he staggered before regaining balance. He spat curses, but his smug grin remained. "Nice shot, little girl, but it'll take more than that to stop me." Marisol's thoughts blurred the smoke, the pain, the rag doll's pleading eyes. She fired again, this time grazing the arm of a man who let out a curse and stumbled back into the street. The cabin quaked as another bullet tore through the weakened frame. Splinters showered over Marisol and Lucas, driving them to shelter behind the scorched remains of a hearth. "Mizzo," Lucas gasped, appraising her shaken hands. "We need to." A tremendous crash interrupted him. The door splintered inward, hurling Lucas into Marisol's arms. He hit the floor hard, breath knocked from his lungs. Marisol scrambled to her knees, dragging him behind a partially standing wall. Silas Cullen strode through the smoke-filled threshold, rifle trained with practiced ease, his black bandana soaked with sweat, eyes glittering with sadistic triumph. Behind him, the trio of spurs followed like shadows of intimidation. Marisol's heart seized. The rifle felt impossibly heavy, each breath searing her lungs. She glanced at the rag doll, its tattered dress singed by an ember that had drifted too close. A spark of clarity ignited within her. Her mother's life depended on her strength. She launched from behind cover, barreling toward the flames as if propelled by destiny rather than fear. Silas's eyes widened in surprise. He raised his rifle, but she was already too close. She fired point blank. The barrel brightened, and Silas pitched forward, eyes glazed, blood blooming across his chest, the other spurs frozen caught between. Revenge and retreat glanced at one another. Lucas dragged himself up beside Marisol, his rifle raised. She met his gaze, fingers trembling on hers. "We can't let them live," Lucas hissed, nausea creeping into his voice. Marisol shook her head. Voice hoarse. "They can tell others what happened. That might save others' lives. Let's go." The camp of spurs hesitated in broken silence, their leader already ruined beneath the burned lintel. Lucas crouched beside Silas, checking for a pulse. None. A heavy thud jolted Marisol's heart. She turned. The rag doll lay on the smoldering floor, button eyes staring at her. She picked it up carefully, wrapping it in her shawl. It felt heavier now, laden with promise and sacrifice. Lucas helped her to her feet. Behind them, The last embers hissed as the cabin collapsed inward. The night air chilled her sweat-damp skin, and the stars above seemed colder than before. Silence followed the tumult. The Red Spurs, once a clan of cruelty, slunk away into the night, leaving the burning ruins and 2 survivors. Lucas placed a hand on Marisol's shoulder. Comfort, apology, respect entwined. Marisol closed her eyes, feeling the rag doll's soft shape against her chest. Each breath was a victory, each trembling step a testament to her resolve. She turned to Lucas, voice weary but unwavering, to Isabel, and then home. Ma needs us. By dawn's faint glow, they had gathered fresh blankets and water. Marisol wrapped her mother in the blankets, laying the rag doll beside her as a guardian. Lucas poured the remaining brew into a bowl, handing it gently to Marisol. "You saved her life," he said quietly. "Your ma owes her life to that doll, and to you." Marisol whispered a thank you to the restless spirits of the ridge, to the stranger who had paid for her doll in a stranger's kindness. But her thoughts drifted to the silhouette that had appeared outside the burning cabin, flickering in the firelight. Riding away into the forest, who was he? A savior? A scout? A threat? The rag doll's button eyes seemed to twinkle in answer. Calling her back to the road she had yet to travel toward, answers cloaked in dusk and legends waiting to stir. For in Loma Perdida, where hope clung like dust and dangers lurked beyond every shadow, the price of salvation was seldom fully paid. At first light, moonlight pooled in silver ripples across the sloping roof of the Ortega homestead as Marisol Ortega knelt by her mother's side, the rag doll's mismatched button eyes fixed upon the fevered brow above. Night carried a hush broken only by the frantic flutter of her mother's breath and the distant call of coyotes weaving through the pines. Each breath felt like a gift and a curse. Life held fast, yet peril circled like vultures waiting to feast upon the weak. Marisol rocked the rag doll gently, humming her mother's lullaby, its melody tremulous, woven from memories of gentler days. The doll's fabric was damp from the cool wash of healing tincture, and its frayed seams whispered of her mother's love stitched into every thread. Beside her, Lucas Cruz shifted on the worn straw mat, rifle across his lap, eyes hooded with exhaustion. He offered Marisol a small flask, half empty, half forgotten. She shook her head, returning the flask with a trembling smile. Words felt too brittle in this place where hope itself seemed to crack under pressure. In the flickering lantern light, Isabel Montez's silhouette hovered at the window, her gaunt frame a dark sentinel against the night sky. The healer's soft chant echoed from within, a litany of prayers interlaced with the rustle of dried herbs. Marisol whispered a silent prayer of her own, eyes fixed on her mother's still form. Then came the sound, hoofbeats, steady and unbroken, like a pulse thrumming through the forest floor. They snapped Marisol's head up, blood hammering in her ears. "They're coming," she whispered, voice a brittle shard of ice. Lucas leapt to his feet, shouldering his rifle. The heavy thud of boots followed Red Spurs, or justice riding to their door, she could not tell. The wooden planks of the cabin shook under harsh blows. Isabel's chant faltered in her throat. Uncertain whether to continue or flee, Marisol clutched the rag doll to her chest, her palms slick with sweat. The doll's button eyes glinted, reflecting the lantern's fiery glow. She pressed a kiss to its frayed forehead, voice a tremor. "Bear witness for her, okay? Bear witness for Mama." A crash splintered the night. Silas Cullen's brawny form erupted through the doorframe, rifle leveled. His grin was venomous, teeth bared like a mad dog. Behind him, the rest of the Spurs crowded in, muskets ready. "Stay back," Lucas shouted, raising his rifle. Silas laughed, dark and hollow. "Such loyalty, but loyalty can get you all killed." Marisol rose, her back to the pallet, rag doll clutched like a shield. "He's not loyal enough for your dead," she spat, her voice stronger than she felt. Silas's eyes narrowed. He gestured, and 2 spurs lunged forward. Isabel cried out, stepping between Marisol and the rising conflict. Lucas fired first once. Twice bullets whizzing past the intruders. Wood splintered as another volley answered from outside. Marisol stumbled, heart stuttering. In the doorway, a figure stood silhouetted against the moonlit pines, a marshal, his silver star gleaming like hope incarnate. "Hold your fire." The marshal roared, voice thunderous. "Drop your weapons, Cullen." Silas sneered at the marshal, but a bullet thumped into the floor by his boot, Lucas's 3rd shot. "Last warning, Marshal?" Silas taunted. A tense pause crackled. The marshal's hand hovered over his holster. "Cullen, this ends now." Silas's sneer faltered. The flicker of guilt or fear passed across his scarred face, but he masked it quickly with rage. "All right then," he spat, raising his rifle. The marshal's shot cracked the air, a silver bullet carving a line through darkness. Silas staggered, blood blooming on his coat. He collapsed onto the threshold, cursing the ground beneath. The remaining spurs hesitated, eyes flicking between their fallen leader and the lawman's unwavering aim. One by one, Lucas's shots pinned their boots to the floor, their will splintering beneath the law's weight. In those frantic moments, Marisol pressed herself against the collapsed figure of Silas Cullen. She felt the rag doll's weight against her heart and held it as though it contained the very soul of her mother. The door fell silent save for the marshal's measured breaths and Isabel's labored chant. "This war ends tonight," the marshal declared, stepping fully into the cabin. His voice, both cold and kind, brushed Marisol's skin like winter's breath. He holstered his weapon and turned to her. "Are you all right?" Marisol nodded, her throat tight. "Mama, she's alive, thanks to you." The marshal glanced at the prone form of Silas Cullen, his wounds. "They'll let me bring him in. That's justice." Lucas knelt beside Marisol, his eyes wet with relief. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "We did it." Marisol's gaze drifted to the rag doll. Its button eyes captured the lantern's weary glow. She breathed in the scent of lavender and poppy, of yarrow and mint, Isabel's promise woven into every stitch. She whispered, so only the doll could hear. "We'll go home now. I promise." A low breeze rattled the window panes as the marshal moved to secure the cabin. Isabel collapsed beside the pallet, exhaustion fracturing her stoic facade. Lucas wrapped an arm around Marisol's waist, friendship forged in blood and courage. Marisol placed the rag doll gently on her mother's pillow and knelt to cradle her hand. Moonlight sifted through the cracks in the walls, painting silver scars upon the floorboards. A new silence settled, one carved by survival, bound by the cost of compassion. "This isn't over," the marshal said, his voice anchored in resolve. "There are more like him out there." Marisol looked up, eyes determined. "Then we'll face them," she said softly. "Together." Lucas squeezed her hand. The marshal nodded, respect flickering in his gaze. Outside, the forest exhaled a breath of calm, but the night beyond the cabin still pulsed with danger. Marisol rose, the rag doll in her arms. Each button eye mirrored the firelight, a testament to battles fought and victories won. She crossed to the door, pausing as dawn's first pale edge brushed the horizon. "This is just part of the story," she whispered to the doll, voice laden with promise. "Stay with me. Middle of part 5. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. In the hush that followed, Marisol Ortega and her companions prepared to ride once more into uncertainty. The first fragile threads of dawn crept across the sky, illuminating the battered form of the Ortega homestead in mournful gray. Marisol Ortega tightened her grip on the rag doll, its patched skirt damp with dew and tears alike. The night's siege had passed, but the aftershocks of violence rattled through her bones. Her mother's fragile breathing rose and fell in gentle waves, still alive, still fighting. And Marisol's heart refused to surrender. Lucas Cruz crouched by the doorway, rifle trained on the thinning tree line. His knuckles whitened around the stock, eyes hooded with vigilance. The marshal's pursuit had driven the red spurs back into the forest, but Marisol knew they wouldn't be deterred so easily. In Loma Perdida, debts of blood lingered like ghosts refusing to rest. Isabel Montes emerged from the cabin's gloom, carrying a basket of steaming broth and bandages. The healer's steps were slow but purposeful, each movement a testament to decades of tending wounds, both physical and spiritual. "I've applied another layer of poultice to her fever," Isabel rumbled, setting the basket on a rickety table. "She's stable but weak. You need to ride again. Child, collect stronger herbs at Black Rock Pass. The fever's only forgiveness is in prevention." Marisol's chest tightened. The pass lay farther east across the plateau where winds howled like banshees and the path twisted through jagged spires of obsidian. It was rumored to be cursed, haunted by the restless dead of the old miners' strikes. But every breath her mother took made the journey inevitable. Lucas rose, tension coiling in his shoulders. "I'll go with you," he volunteered. "Those bandits might be back with more friends." Isabel met his gaze, lips thinning. "Stay and guard the homestead. If they return, they'll seek vengeance. The child needs speed more than strength." Marisol caught Lucas's trembling gaze. She nodded reluctantly. Their friendship had been forged in hardship, but now she needed him here, silent sentinel against the darkness. "Take care of her," she whispered. He hesitated, then touched her wrist. "Be safe, Mizzo. Come back in 3 days or I swear." Marisol squeezed his arm, not trusting her voice. She mounted her mare, the rag doll tucked safe in her pack, and set off toward Black Rock Pass. As the sky bled pink and gold dot, the morning air bit at her face as she rode along the broken trail. Each hoofbeat thumped against Marisol's chest, reminder of her mother's heartbeat waiting beyond the ridge. The obsidian spires of the pass loomed ahead, their surfaces gleaming like fractured glass. A cold breeze carried the scent of sulfur and old blood. Marisol dismounted at the base, her lungs burning. She tightened the straps on her supply satchel and set off on foot, mare tethered to a jutting boulder. The path climbed steeply, loose gravel skittering beneath her boots. Shadows lengthened as she approached the narrow defile known as Widow's Crevice. The walls pressed close, black stone towering on either side like silent judges. Marisol drew strength from the rag doll's quiet presence against her chest. Its button eyes seemed to reassure her. Hope endured. She followed the ribbon of trail through the crevice until she reached a grove of thorn-laden trees dusted with gray moss. Here, the healer's guide said, grew the moonflower root, a herb potent enough to quell the most savage fevers. But it bloomed only in moonlight, its pale petals reflecting the night's glow. Marisol knelt by the roots, digging carefully with her fingers. Her palms scraped against jagged stone, drawing drops of blood that mingled with the moss. She uprooted the delicate moonflower bulbs, wrapping them in cloth before stowing them in her bag. A noise soft but unmistakable drifted through the grove. Marisol froze, pulse hammering. The rag doll slipped from her cloak and tumbled to the earth, its head landing against the moonflower's soft petals. She bent to retrieve it, and that's when she saw him, the stranger who had bought her doll weeks before. He stood at the grove's edge, cloak drawn tight against the wind, hat brim shading his eyes. "Why do you follow me?" Marisol's voice trembled with anger and confusion. He stepped into the clearing, revealing a scar that ran from temple to jaw, pale slash stark against sun-darkened skin. "Your rag doll is under my protection," he said quietly. Maya Isol crossed her arms, bruised pride rising. "It's mine, not yours." "Why interfere?" He inclined his head, gestures precise. "Because it carries a promise. I pay for promises, child. Debts come due. Marisol's breath caught. My mother's life isn't for sale. The stranger's eyes softened. Not for sale. For honor. She took a step forward, digging heels into gravel. You don't know me. He gave a half smile. I know fear. Her fury flared. Stay out of my way. He inclined his head and melted back into shadow. Until next time. Marisol's heart thundered as she watched him vanish. The grove felt too silent, too still, as if the land itself held its breath. She retrieved the rag doll, its button eyes bright with moonflower pollen, and tucked it safely back within her cloak. Dusk painted the sky in bruised purples as Marisol returned to Lucas. He paced impatiently at the homestead's threshold, rifle in hand. I found them, she announced, voice low but triumphant. Moonflower roots and black elderberries, enough to break the fever. Lucas snapped the bag shut. Relief washed over his features, replaced quickly by concern. You met him. Marisol's jaw clenched. The one who bought the doll, he's here. Lucas's eyes narrowed. He didn't follow you through Widows Crevice, did he? She shook her head. I'm not sure why he's interested. Lucas exhaled, gaze drifting to the looming pines. In Loma Perdita, debts never sleep. We'll be ready. Night fell, and Isabel's hearth flame welcomed them. Home. Marisol fed her mother the first dose of dusk's concoction, watching life rekindle in her eyes. The rag doll rested on her mother's pillow, a silent sentinel under the flickering lamp. Lucas and Marisol sat by the door, trading quiet words and sharpening resolve. Outside, the wind rustled through the pines, whispers of old grudges searching for purchase. Marisol traced the rag doll's stitched seams. Each thread was a lifeline. Each button eye, a vow. Tomorrow, she would face the debts of blood calling her name. Tomorrow, Loma Perdita would demand payment, but tonight, beneath Isabel's watchful gaze and Lucas's steadfast presence, Marisol Ortega allowed herself a moment's rest, her rag doll pressed to her heart, and her mother's life held firmly in her hands. The dawn would come with new battles, but she would meet them with hope unbroken, one brave breath at a time. The crimson dawn cast long shadows across the plateau as Marisol Ortega and Lucas Cruz crested the final ridge before Loma Perdita. Marisol's gait was stiff with exhaustion, each footfall against the parched earth a reminder of the miles and the battles behind her. The rag doll lay secure in her pack, its presence a gentle weight against her back. Below, the town's dusty roofs and shuttered windows sprawled like a wounded animal, recovering from last night's assault. Word had spread, the Red Spurs had been repelled, their leader downed by a rifle's whisper. Yet Marisol knew vengeance was a slow beast, it wouldn't stay starving for long. They descended the jagged path, limbs sore, spirits wary. Lucas scanned the tree line with hawk-like intensity, eyes never resting. Marisol bit back a plea to rest, to linger in the homestead's fragile peace, her mother's soft murmurings in the breeze, a lullaby of fragile hope, but duty pulled her. Onward, they rode through the empty streets, wary glances upon every boarded doorway. A few townsfolk ventured out, clustering behind safe thresholds, eyes bright with relief and dread. Marisol nodded to a mother carrying a child, the pair trembling where they stood. The sight made her heart constrict. This town, her people, deserved protection as her mother deserved life. Inside the broken Spur Saloon, its battered sign now patched with splintered wood, Lucas tethered his mare. The barkeep, a gaunt man with hollowed cheeks, offered them coffee and silent gratitude. Marisol accepted the steaming cup with a weary nod. You stopped them, the barkeep rasped, voice heavy. I know you did. Marisol managed a tired smile. Just doing what's right. He placed a battered map on the counter. They won't rest. I marked where they camped 2 leagues east, near the salt flats. You'll find trouble if you head that way. Marisol studied the map, Lucas, leaning in. The salt flats shimmered in the midday heat, a treacherous expanse where mirages lured men to their deaths. But beyond that lay the old brine wells of Still Active. They might provide wood and water for the townsfolk, a vital lifeline. Lucas raised an eyebrow. You want to go chase them across the flats? Marisol's jaw tightened. They need to know this town isn't easy prey. If we can clear that hideout, maybe they'll think twice. He hesitated, then nodded. Then let's finish this. They gathered supplies, water skins, dried jerky, extra ammunition, and saddled their horses once more. The barkeep gave Marisol a small token, a carved wooden star, a keepsake for protection. She tucked it into her pocket, bruised faith ignited. By his gesture, the salt flats lay beyond the eastern rim of town, a white expanse that shimmered and danced under the scorching sun. The horses faltered in the brittle crust, hooves clicking against crystallized ground. Each mile stretched into an eternity as heat mirages teased their senses. Lucas shaded his eyes. I see them, he pointed to dark specks on the horizon. Riders clustered around flickers of campfire. Miris. Oil touched the rag doll through her pack, a silent promise to return alive. She spotted a low ravine to their left, offering cover from the watchful sentries. Dismounting, they led their horses through the break in the salt surface. Ember-dry air crackled around them. At the ravine's edge, they crouched behind a jutting boulder. Marsh grasses crackled beneath the shards of salt. The Red Spurs camp lay below. A dozen riders gathered around half-burned wagons, their weapons strewn carelessly. Marisol's breath steadied. She counted the men, estimated their distance. Lucas handed her a scoped rifle, nodding. One shot, then we move. Marisol set her cheek against the stock. She aimed at the camp center, where Silas Collins, second in command, barked orders. The world sharpened, the slick of sweat on the man's brow. The way his boot tapped wood, the tell of a raised elbow. She exhaled, squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked like the earth breaking. The bullet struck metal, sending the target stumbling. Hurling his rifle aside, chaos erupted. Spurs scrambled for cover, curses tearing through the still air. Now! Lucas hissed, shouldering his own weapon. They descended the ravine, movement swift as water pouring through cracks. Lucas led the charge, firing into the camp center. Marisol followed, rifle singing with each shot. Spurs scattered, some ran for their horses, others dived behind wagons. Lucas lunged at a man reaching for a second pistol. The two grappled. Marisol's bullet knocked the man's arm, sending the weapon spinning across the salt. He howled. Clutching his broken wrist, Marisol spotted another rider mounting a horse, poised to flee to bring reinforcements. The rag doll's ragged visage flashed in her mind, a symbol of her mother's fragile fight. She raised her rifle. The rider's hat brim shaded his eyes, but she recognized him before she fired. The stranger who had bought her doll. His horse bolted sideways, raising a spray of salt as Marisol's shot caught the animals. Flank, he reined in, dismounting with measured grace, a hand pressed to his side. Under the brim, his scar caught the sunlight, a pale slash that matched the dirt-streaked stubble on his cheek. Marisol Ortega. He addressed her, voice steady as carved stone. You're far from the homestead. She kept her rifle raised. Heart pounding. Stay back. He inclined his head. I came to pay an old debt. Her hand tightened around the trigger. Then pay it somewhere else. The remaining Spurs, leaderless and bewildered, scrambled for the far ridge. Lucas fired 2 final shots, sending them into flight. They fled into the horizon, dust plumes like sickened ghosts. Marisol lowered her rifle, eyes fixed on the stranger, whose silhouette stood between hope and ruin. He stepped forward, gaze unwavering. I told you, till next time. Marisol's chest tightened. Why do you keep following me? He paused, clearing blood from his side. Because I choose to honor a promise made under desperate circumstances. She swallowed, memory swirling back to that dying plea. That doesn't give you the right to interfere. He offered her a leather-bound ledger, scorched at the corners, the price book of debts he'd amassed, including her mother's coin. She recognized the scrawl. He had tracked her journey, every purchase, every sacrifice. Your debt to life, he said quietly. It's paid. Marisol stared at the book, a testament to every soul she'd saved, every sacrifice made. The ledger flickered in the salt's glare like a beacon. She realized then, the stranger was neither savior nor foe. He was executor of balance, keeper of debts and promises in a world forgotten by mercy. Lucas watched warily. What happens now? Marisol opened the ledger, eyes scanning the entries. Seed for the orphanage, water for the well, blankets for the cold-born. Each entry bore her ink and his gold. She closed the book, determination settling like armor. Now we finish rebuilding. For Ma, for Loma Perdida, for every rag doll and every promise that kept us alive. The stranger nodded once, stepping back into the edge of the dust. Then let me ride with you, if only to keep you out of trouble. Marisol hesitated, then slipped the rag doll from her pack, offering it with reverence. He took it gently, button eyes meeting his weathered gaze. You're welcome, she said softly. He tucked the doll into his satchel. His hand lingered on the fabric before he mounted. Until next time. And as they watched the empty camp behind them, Marisol knew the road ahead would be wrought with peril and promise alike. But every promise, big or small, had a way of binding hearts across the expanse of dust and despair. With Lucas at her side and the stranger riding guard, Marisol Ortega led the charge back to Loma Perdida, carrying the rag doll's silent vow. That hope could be bartered, but never broken, no matter the cost. A bruised sun slipped below the horizon as Marisol Ortega loosed her mare's reins at the edge of Black Rock Pass. The spires of obsidian loomed like silent sentinels, their jagged forms bleeding into the twilight sky. A chill press of wind swept through the pass, carrying with it whispers of old regrets and unsettled debts. Marisol's heart pounded beneath her ribs as the rag doll rested against her chest, its button eyes reflecting the dying light like twin embers of resolve. She dismounted, her boots crunching unbroken shale. The battered ledger, the debt book hung from her belt, its pages fluttering in the wind. Lucas Cruz lingered at the mouth of the pass, rifle at readiness, eyes sharp against the darkening landscape. If they're here, Lucas murmured, voice low, they'll be desperate. We need to move carefully. Marisol nodded, finger brushing the spine of the ledger. Its weight reminded her that every promise, every act of mercy, demanded payment. Their path led through a narrow defile, the walls narrowing until only slivers of sky remained overhead. The ground here was slick with mineral dust, footsteps echoing like distant warnings. They pressed deeper until the defile opened into a wide basin. Moonlight glittered across alkaline pools, the water's surface rippled with silver light. Here, perched atop a cluster of black stones, was the outlaw camp, a dozen tents of patched canvas, half-burned torches flickering as figures moved within. Marisol swallowed, memories of past battles shimmering in her mind, her mother's feverish plea, the cabin siege, the stranger's ledger. Each moment had led here to a confrontation, where mercy and vengeance would collide under the haunted night sky. Lucas scanned his rifle's sights. Shall I give them a warning shot? Marisol shook her head. No, we need them to see us. Riding forward, they kicked their horses into a trot, the animals' hooves drumming against the rock. Spurs of metal caught the moon's glow, signaling challenge. The outlaws froze, torches flaring as they rushed to their feet. Outside the nearest tent flap, a voice growled, "Look what crawled out of the canyon's Ortega and her dog." Marisol's chest tightened. She swung off her mare, jacket slapping, and Lucas followed. The rag doll nestled in the folds of her coat, its stitched seams a quiet testament to her journey. Silas Cullen's ghostly echo rippled through her mind, no longer leader, but legend born of bone and blood. Yet it was his second-in-command, Raphael Knuckles Morante, who stepped forward now, broad-shouldered, scarred, his knuckles wrapped in blood-soaked tape. "We heard you chased us off," Morante spat, voice thick with malice. "Now you're back. Got any more coins to throw at your dead mother's fever?" Marisol's gaze swept the assembled outlaws, each face etched with greed and desperation. She held the ledger forward, pages splayed like wings. "This ends tonight," she said, voice steady. "Because I collected every debt, paid every price. You have nothing left to demand." A hush fell over the camp. Morante's lip curled. "You think that book protects you?" Marisol pressed her palm to the rag doll's head. "More than your guns ever could." He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. He jerked a hand, signaling the others. In unison they drew steel pistols, knives, clubs. Lucas braced at her side, rifle leveled. For a heartbeat, time stretched. The hiss of wind, the scrape of leather, the ragged echo of Marisol's breath. Then Morante lunged, fist raised. Marisol ducked, discarding the rag doll to one side. It landed atop a bleached skull half buried in the alkaline earth, its button eyes staring through the tense torn canvas. Lucas fired twice, bullets thudding into the ground behind Morante, who froze in mid-strike. The camp erupted. Gunfire, shouts, the clang of steel on stone. Marisol seized the moment, snatching the ledger from her belt. She advanced toward Morante, eyes aflame. "My family's life isn't for your blood money." Morante's fist glinted, arcing toward her face, but Marisol sidestepped, grass crackling underfoot. She pressed forward, thrusting the ledger into his chest. The book's heavy covers cracked ribs, sending Morante reeling. He staggered back, clutching his side. The outlaws wavered, their focus torn between revenge and shock. Above them, the obsidian spires groaned as if bearing witness. Marisol exhaled, voice rising. "I paid my debts. Now it's your turn." She yanked her rifle to her shoulder, sights locked on Morante. He met her gaze, chest heaving, blood darkening his shirt. "Leave," she commanded, "and never come back." A tense silence. Then Morante gave a raspy bark of laughter. "Brave words, girl. But a camp full of men. Don't think we'll take orders from a rag doll's mistress." Marisol's jaw clenched. She pressed the rifle trigger. A single shot split the night. Morante's pistol spun from his grip, his knees buckling as the bullet lodged in the rock behind him. He fell, eyes wide with disbelief. Lucas swiftly knocked away a charging outlaw's gun, sending it skittering into the darkness. The rest froze, uncertainty rippling through their ranks. Then Morante groaned, climbing to his feet, stumbling toward the half-buried skull. He retrieved the rag doll by its torn hem, his fingers brushing the button eyes. He froze, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. Marisol stepped forward, voice gentle yet firm. "It's hers," she said, nodding toward the doll. "A mother's final promise." Morante's brow furrowed as memories surfaced, his own mother's passing. The price he once paid. He looked at the ledger in Marisol's hand, then at his men. His shoulders slumped, bravado crumbling. "Go," he rasped, voice tight, "before I lose my nerve." One by one, the outlaws melted into the night, boots crunching over salt and shale. Morante lingered, gaze fixed on Marisol. "You're something," he said, voice hollow. Marisol nodded, retrieving the rag doll. "Something to protect." As Morante vanished into the shadows, Lucas sheathed his rifle, exhaling. Marisol pressed the doll against her cheek, its button eyes cool against her skin. "Let's go home," she whispered. They mounted their horses. Beneath the obsidian spires, the rag doll safe at Marisol's side. Ahead lay Loma Perdita, its lights flickering like fragile stars. Behind them, the dark basin lay deserted, a testament to promises kept and debts paid in the moonlight. And as they rode toward dawn, Marisol Ortega felt the weight of her journey lighten, knowing that even in a world carved by violence, hope endured, stitched together by the hands that dared to believe in second chances. Night draped Loma Perdita in velvet silence as Marisol Ortega rode back into town, sunburnt face cold under starlight. Her mare's labored breaths puffed in the frigid air, each exhale marking their steady progress toward home. The rag doll, nestled safely in her packet's patchwork skirt, now dust-streaked and worn but vital as the promise etched in every fraying stitch. Lucas Cruz met her at the edge of town, lantern in hand, eyes bright with relief. Isabel Montez's cabin lay behind them, smoke curling from the chimney like a sigh of hope. Marisol slid from the saddle, legs trembling, and looped the mare behind a battered hitching post. "We did it," Lucas whispered, voice thick with emotion. "The herbs. She took the tincture tonight and slept." Marisol nodded, voice hushed. "Mom's fever finally broke. Isabel says she'll be on the mend by morning." Lucas exhaled, relief softening his features. "I'll help unload." Together, they fetched the supplies: moonflower roots, yarrow pouches, vials of tincture, each one a lifeline for the Ortega family. The night air carried distant echoes, wolves howling beyond the pines, yet here, within Loma Perdita's battered walls, they carved out sanctuary. At the homestead, Marisol's mother lay propped on fresh blankets, cheeks flushed with healing color. Her eyes fluttered open as Marisol knelt, placing the rag doll upon the pillow. "Ma," Marisol whispered, "you're safe." Her mother's quivering smile trembled at life's thin edge. "Mizzo, you saved me." Marisol pressed her lips to her mother's forehead. "I'll always come back for you." Lucas stepped back, glancing toward the dark street. "Something's not right." Marisol's gaze sharpened. She clutched the rag doll. Footsteps on gravel. Too many to be drifters. Too deliberate to be mere travelers. She rose, heart pounding. "Stay here," she told her mother. Then she moved to the door, Lucas at her shoulder. Through the window, dozens of torches flickered, dozens of figures advancing. Outlaws? Or the law? A voice drifted across the yard, angry, accusatory. "Marisol Ortega." Marisol's breath caught. The rag doll slipped from her arms, tumbling to the wooden porch with a soft thud. She bent to retrieve it and froze at the sight of her rescuing stranger. Stepping into the lantern's glow, he wore the marshal's grin now, a rare, true smile. Behind him, wagon wheels groaned. Horses stamped. A unit of deputies followed, badges shining in the lamplight. "Marshal," Marisol breathed. Stunned, he tipped his hat. "Miss Ortega, I've come for my ledger." Marisol's brow furrowed. "Your ledger?" He nodded toward the ledger's ornate cover, the Book of Debts. She had returned, now ceremoniously suspended from the marshal's belt. "Consider it settled." Shouts erupted from the street. Men with rifles swung toward the homestead red spurs, myriad and vengeful, guns leveled. The marshal drew his pistol. "Deputies, take cover." Marisol sprang forward, blocking the doll. From the ground, Lucas moved to her side. "You made a lot of enemies," the marshal said quietly. "But you've got friends, too." The first volley cracked the night. Bullets splintered the porch rails. Marisol felt the sting of wood fragments ricocheting against her arm. Without hesitation, she pulled Lucas inside and locked the door behind them. Deputies returned fire from behind barrels. Rifles cracked in the cold air. Her mother stirred, delirium breaking as she sensed the battle unfolding. Marisol rushed to her side, pulling blankets around her. The rag doll lay safe in her hands. She pressed it to her mother, voice fierce. "They can't have you, not ever." Outside, the marshal and Lucas intercepted the outlaws, gunfire echoing like thunder. Each moment stretched, charged with fear. And loyalty. Marisol's mother touched her hand. Mizzo, remember hope. Marisol nodded, tears shining. Hope endures. She stepped to the window, gazing at the raging conflict. Shadows danced on broken walls. Torches carved shapes of rage. The rag doll's button eyes seemed to burn in the lantern's glow, reflecting the promise Marisol had made. To protect, to endure, to face whatever came. In that silent exchange between mother and daughter, they vowed to stand together, no matter the darkness, and to clothe the world in hope. One rag doll and one brave heart at a time. Dawn's first light bled pale gold across the scorched porch of the Ortega homestead as Marisol Ortega assessed the aftermath. Spent cartridges lay scattered like talismans of survival in the dew-soaked boards. Deputies tended to their wounded and corralled the defeated Red Spurs, while the marshal organized a temporary jail within the broken remains of the town jailhouse. Marisol's mother, pale but resolute, sat propped on the pallet, cradling the rag doll close. Isabel Montez moved between the two women, her soft hands steady as she applied fresh tincture and bandages. Marisol knelt beside her mother, voice thick with relief. "How do you feel?" Her mother smiled, though fatigue weighed heavy. "Stronger. Thanks to you." Marisol's gaze shifted to the marshal, who rode up with Lucas trailing behind. The ledger, their silent pact, hung from his saddle. He dismounted, offering it back with quiet ceremony. "I believe this belongs to you now," he said, voice measured. "And you to it." Marisol accepted the ledger, touching its cover as though honoring a sacred relic. "Thank you." The marshal inclined his head. Justice was served. But the law won't watch over this town forever. Lucas straightened, anger flickering in his eyes. "Leave it to us. Marisol's earned our loyalty." The marshal met Lucas's gaze. "You both have. Loma Perdita is in capable hands." He nodded to the deputies. "Secure these men. They'll face trial in Carson City." As the deputies led the outlaws away, Marisol felt the rag doll stir within her mother's arms. Its button eyes gleamed in the dawn light, silent witnesses to every trial endured. The marshal turned to Marisol. One final thing. He produced a small tin box, weathered and hinged with care. "Open the day you need it." Marisol took the box, examining its tarnished surface. "What's inside?" He smiled gently, the kind of smile born from years of carrying burdens. Hope, in its purest form. She opened the box to find a single heart-shaped locket. Inside lay a faded lock of hair and a tiny photograph. A young woman cradling a baby too. Generations bound by love and sacrifice. "This was mine," the marshal said softly, voice thick. "My ma kept it close until her final breath. When she couldn't speak, she gave this to me. It reminded me that love endures beyond loss." Marisol's eyes glistened. She closed the locket, pressing it to her chest. The rag doll in her mother's arms seemed to glow in the morning light. "Pass it on," the marshal continued. "When you face a debt you can't pay with coin. Let it remind you that some currencies can't be stolen." Marisol nodded, voice hushed. "I will." The marshal mounted, tipping his hat to the weary family. "Safe travels, Miss Ortega. Keep the promise alive." He rode off with his deputies, the locket's inheritance entrusted to Marisol's care. After the marshal disappeared beyond the horizon, Lucas exhaled. "You got the world's heaviest coin." Marisol laughed softly, locket warm against her heart. "It's priceless." Together, they tended to the homestead, clearing splintered wood, healing wounds, and sharing dawn. Coffee with neighbors who emerged blinking at the new day. Isabel rested her hand on Marisol's shoulder. "You've done more than save your mother. You saved this town's soul." Marisol brushed a strand of hair from her face. The rag doll's button eyes caught the possible light, all-knowing and bright. "We all did it together." As the sun climbed higher, life returned to Loma Perdita's battered streets. Children ran with wooden swords, men hammered fresh planks for boarded windows, and women hung laundry that fluttered like prayers in the breeze. Marisol stood at the threshold of her home, rag doll in one arm, locket in the other. Tomorrows. Battles would come, as debts of blood and honor never truly sleep in wild lands. But for this moment, this fragile interlude, she allowed herself a breath of peace. She had kept her mother's promise, repaid every coin, and in doing so, reborn hope from the ashes. As she stepped into the light of a new day, Marisol Ortega knew that the rag doll's stitched heart beat within her own, a testament to the enduring power of love and the courage to defy darkness, one promise at a time. Marisol Ortega stood at the edge of Loma Perdida's dusty street, the rag doll nestled in her arms like a keystone of survival. Moonlight draped the boarded storefronts in silver, revealing splintered doors and shuttered windows that still bore the scars of the Red Spur's siege. Life had returned in fits and starts, quiet whispers of rebuilding under the watchful eyes of Lucas Cruz and Isabel Montez. But Marisol sensed an undercurrent of unease threading through the town. She crossed the broken threshold of the Silver Star Saloon, where the barkeep offered a cautious nod and a mug of steaming coffee. The rich aroma filled her senses, grounding her in the present. She accepted the cup with a nod, gratitude heavier than the coin she once held. Lucas appeared beside her, arms crossed, shadowed gaze scanning the empty street. "They've been asking questions," he said quietly. "Neighbors report seeing riders black-clad, circling the town's perimeter." Marisol swallowed, rag doll clutched to her chest. "Vultures," she murmured, "waiting for weaknesses." Lucas glanced at the doll. "They saw you fight, might think you're the prize." She tightened her fingers around the doll's frayed. They'll regret underestimating a promise." A soft whistle echoed outside. Marisol and Lucas exchanged a glance, weapons instinctively at the ready. The saloon doors creaked inward with deliberate slowness. Silence followed until a lone rider entered, wide-brimmed hat tipped low, long coat trailing behind him. He moved with measured calm, boots tapping like distant drums. Marisol's breath caught. The stranger who had bought her rag doll stood among them once more, her button eyes now a silent warning. He removed his hat, revealing the scar along his cheekbone. His dark eyes flicked to Marisol, then Lucas, then settled on the doll nestled in her arms. He nodded gently, as though passing through long-forgotten territory. "May I sit?" he asked, voice as smooth as polished steel. Marisol gestured to an empty stool. Lucas watched warily as the stranger settled, his coat brushing dust off the worn floorboards. "I come bearing news," the stranger said softly. Marisol Ortega stood at the edge of Loma Perdida's dusty street, the rag doll nestled in her arms like a keystone of survival. Moonlight draped the boarded storefronts in silver, revealing splintered doors and shuttered windows that still bore the scars of the Red Spur's siege. Life had returned in fits and starts, quiet whispers of rebuilding under the watchful eyes of Lucas Cruz and Isabel Montez. But Marisol sensed an undercurrent of unease threading through the town. She crossed the broken threshold of the Silver Star Saloon, where the barkeep offered a cautious nod and a mug of steaming coffee. The rich aroma filled her senses, grounding her in the present. She accepted the cup with a nod, gratitude heavier than the coin she once held. Lucas appeared beside her, arms crossed, shadowed gaze scanning the empty street. "They've been asking questions," he said quietly. "Neighbors report seeing riders black-clad, circling the town's perimeter." Marisol swallowed, rag doll clutched to her chest. "Vultures," she murmured, "waiting for weaknesses." Lucas glanced at the doll. "They saw you fight, might think you're the prize." She tightened her fingers around the doll's frayed. They'll regret underestimating a promise." A soft whistle echoed outside. Marisol and Lucas exchanged a glance, weapons instinctively at the ready. The saloon doors creaked inward with deliberate slowness. Silence followed until a lone Ryder entered, wide-brimmed hat tipped low, long coat trailing behind him. He moved with measured calm, boots tapping like distant drums. Marisol's breath caught. The stranger who had bought her rag doll stood among them once more, her button eyes now a silent warning. He removed his hat, revealing the scar along his cheekbone. His dark eyes flicked to Marisol, then Lucas, then settled on the doll nestled in her arms. He nodded gently, as though passing through long-forgotten territory. "May I sit?" he asked, voice as smooth as polished steel. Marisol gestured to an empty stool. Lucas watched warily as the stranger settled, his coat brushing dust off the worn floorboards. "I come bearing news," the stranger said softly, glancing skyward. "Word of the Blackwood gang's resurgence, faster and deadlier than before." Marisol's hand went to the doll's head, pressing its button eyes. "We stopped the Red Spurs. Blackwood's a different breed." The stranger's eyes hardened. "Blackwood seeks vengeance on those who defied him. He's already taken 6 towns between here and the Colorado line. His bounty grows." Lucas's jaw clenched. "Not under our watch." Marisol Ortega rose before the sun, the rag doll tucked carefully into her saddlebag beside the weathered locket. The promise now etched into her very bones guided her steps as she and Lucas Cruz made their way to the town's makeshift council hall, a repurposed barn lit by lanterns and hope. Townsfolk gathered amid rough-hewn benches, farmers, shopkeepers, even families who had never known safety until now. The air buzzed with nervous energy, for tonight, Loma Perdita would stand its final test. At the front, the stranger who had bought Marisol's doll, his scarred features softened by lamplight, unfurled the parchment map across a crude table. His voice carried authority born of battle-scarred wisdom as he outlined the evening's plan. Barricade the east entrance, rig alley traps, station sharpshooters on upper balconies, funnel any assault toward the old water tower, where Lucas and the deputies, reinforced by volunteers, would hold the line. Marisol listened, heart swelling with pride and terror. This was no longer her solitary fight. Every man and woman here had chosen to stand beside her. She glanced at the rag doll, its button eyes shining in the lantern's glow, an emblem of collective hope. At sunset, they moved. Under Marisol's leadership, teams erected crude barricades of salvaged planks and wagons. Lucas led the sharpshooters up narrow staircases in the saloon, their rifles trained on the ridge beyond. Isabel gathered the children and elder women in the healer's cabin, offering tea and final words of comfort. Marisol patrolled the perimeter, rag doll at her side, offering words of reassurance. "Stay behind the barricade. I'll hold the line." Night fell with sudden finality. The first horns of the Blackwood gang sounded like thunder on the ridge. Torches flickered at the crest, ragged shapes descending toward Loma Perdita's defenses. The air trembled with the promise of violence. Marisol raised her arms. "Hold fast," she called. Deputies and volunteers steadied rifles, hearts pounding. The attack struck like a whirlwind. Outlaws surged against the east barricade, rifles snarling. Deputies answered with disciplined volleys, the night erupting in a chorus of gunfire. Splinters flew as wagons buckled. Dogs barked in alarm. Lucas's sharpshooters picked off targets with lethal precision. One by one, Blackwood's men fell from the balconies. Lucas's own shot rang out, silencing an outlaw who aimed at Marisol. But Blackwood had learned from Whisper Valley's tale. He came prepared. A hidden avalanche of dynamite blasts shook the town's walls, sending shrapnel ricocheting. Screams split the night. Marisol leapt to deflect a falling plank, rag doll tumbling at her feet. Chaos reigned, and for a heartbeat, defeat glimmered at Loma Perdita's gates. Yet Marisol's resolve hardened. She retrieved the doll, pressing its button, eyes to her lips. "Not tonight," she whispered. She surged toward the breach, Lucas at her heels. Together, they rallied the deputies, pushing the outlaws back. The stranger advanced alongside them, pistol blazing, his scar a white slash in the firelight. Hours passed in a blur of smoke and steel. Dawn's pale edge crept over the horizon as the last of Blackwood's gang fled into shattered silence, leaving their wounded and dead behind. Loma Perdita had held. Exhausted cheers rose from the battered defenders as they surveyed the cost. Splintered walls, broken barrels, but no knocked-down souls. Marisol sank to her knees by the rag doll, smudged, torn, but standing upright. She pressed its frayed form to her cheek, tears carving clean paths. A quiet pride swelled in her chest. Isabel embraced her, voice thick. "You did it, child." Lucas knelt beside them, bandaged arms slack with relief. "You led them." The stranger stepped forward, removing his hat. "You saved them all." Marisol's voice trembled with gratitude and exhaustion. "We saved ourselves, together." Outside, the first rays of sun banished the ghosts of Blackwood's assault. New day promised new tasks, rebuilding, healing, honoring the fallen. But for today, Loma Perdita stood unbroken. Marisol rose, rag doll in hand, and led the town in a silent procession to the small graveyard on the hill. Each villager laid a wildflower upon the earth. Marisol placed hers before her doll's portrait, an artist's homage carved in wood by the BRRKEEP. She whispered to the winds, "May we never forget what hope can build and what darkness can destroy." Then, hand in hand with Lucas, Isabel, and the stranger, she turned toward home, rag doll at her side, a reminder that in the end, even the smallest promise can uplift a world forgotten by time, one courageous heart at a time. The midday sun burned fiercely overhead as Marisol Ortega led her weary mare down the rutted lane toward the Ortega homestead. The rag doll, now neatly folded in her satchel, felt unusually heavy, its patched skirts weighed down by the burdens of her journey. Alongside her rode Lucas Cruz, whose watchful gaze scanned every ridge and hollow. Wary of ambushes and Spitfire vengeance, Loma Perdita lay ahead like a mirage of hope, smoke curling from chimneys, the makeshift barricade at the town's entrance, and the battered silhouette of the Silver Star Saloon. Yet for all its signs of life, the town bore the scars of Blackwood's imminent return. Plumes of dust on the eastern horizon, false alarms, perhaps, or the vanguard of what was to come. "Think they're testing us?" Lucas asked, voice low. Marisol's lips tightened. "I'd wager they're sizing up our defenses, waiting for weakness." They quickened their pace, reaching the homestead where Isabel Montez tended the herb garden. The healer's expression flickered from relief to concern as Marisol dismounted. "My mother?" Marisol asked, heart tightening. Isabel wiped her hands on her apron. "Stable, but she's too weak to move yet. Keep her here." Marisol placed the rag doll on the porch railing and closed her mother's shutters. "We'll guard her." Isabel nodded, pressing a small satchel into Marisol's hand. "Salve for wounds. If Blackwood's men breach the walls, use it sparingly." Inside the cabin, her mother's pale face turned at the sound of Marisol's voice. With trembling hands, Marisol smoothed the lantern's light across her mother's cheek. "Stay strong, Ma," she whispered. "I'll protect you." Her mother's gaze found Marisol's. "Promise me you'll see this through." She rasped. Marisol nodded, tears glistening. "I promise." Outside, Lucas mounted a raised crate to address the assembled guards volunteers armed with pitchforks, rifles, and iron wills. The rag doll's presence on the railing drew curious glances, its button eyes a silent talisman for the defenders. Marisol watched as Lucas directed men to key positions. The water tower to the north, the saloon balcony to the south, and narrow alleyways to the west. Patrols would circle every 30 minutes. Watchfires kept dying embers alive in iron troughs. Dusk approached with an uneasy calm, the kind that grips the lungs and stifles the breath. Marisol gathered a small band of sharpshooters around the pond. Saloon's upper windows, Lucas standing by to oversee reloads and cover the flanks. When the sun's last rays bled beyond the hills, the first torches of Blackwood's gang glimmered in the dusk. 10, 20, growing to 30 as they approached the town's gates, their long coats whipped in the wind, their spirits high with the arrogance of fear. Marshal Dalton's words echoed in Marisol's mind. Justice won't watch over this town forever. But justice had a face now, her face, Lucas's. And every soul who refused to bow under tyranny. The gates bowed inward under the outlaw's weight. Splintering wood cracked under simultaneous blows. Marisol's rifle stuttered from the upper window, a lone defender's cry piercing the charged air. One outlaw sank backward, the lantern beside him flickering out. Below, Lucas rallied the defenders. Hold the line. For every step they take, they bleed. The rag doll's button eyes stared steadfastly from its perch, a beacon against the onslaught. In that moment, Marisol understood. Legends don't die. They live in the hearts of those who dare to believe. A thunder of hooves approached the main street. Reinforcements or another layer of Blackwood's wrath. Marisol braced herself, rifle cradled. Every heartbeat a drum of war. As night enveloped Loma Perdida, and the first shots of the final assault cracked like lightning, Marisol Ortega closed her eyes, clutching the rag doll to her chest. Not this time, she vowed into the darkness. We stand together. And with that silent oath, she opened fire. The rag doll's mismatched button eyes shining, a small spark of hope igniting amidst the storm. Marisol Ortega awoke to a sky of bruised violet, the horizon bleeding promise and dread in equal measure. The rag doll lay on her chest, its patched fabric warm against her skin, a steadfast talisman for a town on the brink. Around her, Loma Perdida stirred to life, the hammer's ring at the blacksmith's forge, the rustle of laundry lines overhead and far off, the cautious blows of lumber upon splintered wood as townsfolk repaired what Blackwood's rage had shattered. But Marisol's mind was tethered to the ridge beyond the saloon roof, where she and Lucas had seen the first silhouettes of Blackwood's returning riders. They would come again, smarter and hungrier, their vengeance sharpened by failure. She rose, slipping the rag doll into her saddlebag, and made for the Silver Star Saloon. Inside, her rescuing stranger, his scar grown faint beneath fresh stubble, stood. Before a map spread across the bar top, deputies and volunteers gathered at his back. His voice carried the authority of iron and years behind a desk full of case files. We can't simply hold them at the barricades, he said, hands splayed like a general eyeing the field. They'll approach under cover of night again. We need to take the fight to them, neutralize their scouts, break their supply lines. Loma Perdida must become a thorn in their side. Marisol exchanged a look with Lucas, the margin of a smile passing between them. What do you need us to do? She asked. The stranger leaned forward. Ride out at dawn. Your mare is swift. Strike their camps at first light, scatter their horses. Without mounts, they can't lay siege. Lucas will lead a second group to sabotage their wagons. I'll coordinate reinforcements. Isabel will tend to any wounded. Night deepened before plan and provisions were set. By candlelight, Marisol packed the satchel with healing salve, bread, and water. Lucas strapped extra bullets to his belt. The rag doll's presence seemed to steady her breath as she tucked it among the supplies. At first light, Marisol and a dozen riders slipped out unnoticed through the eastern gate. The valley lay silent, mist clinging like ghosts the pines. The Blackwood camp, abandoned at dusk, but still marked by cold embers, waited at the basin's edge. Marisol urged her mare forward, heart pounding as rifle barrels glinted like hungry eyes. The raid unfolded in controlled chaos. Marisol's shot clipped a halter. Horses panicked and broke free. Riders scrambled to recapture mounts. Lucas and his team lobbed blazing torches at wagons, wheels splintering under heat. Cries echoed across the Don Valley, and echoes of hoofbeats pursued the retreating Loma Perdita riders. Back at the saloon, Isabel's cabin was besieged. Blackwood's scouts had found it. Lucas returned to rally defenders, while Marisol raced toward the homestead. She found Isabel fending off 2 riders at the door, her gnarled shawl used like a flail. Marisol's rifle cracked twice, dropping each rider before they could strike. Isabel straightened, relief washing across her lined face. "Too close," she rasped. "Thanks to you." Marisol returned her gaze upstream to the ridge, where Blackwood's horses had returned, now mounted by new riders, their shadows stretching like long knives. "They'll come again," she whispered, voice grim. Lucas appeared, hand on her shoulder. "We've only bought time. They'll tire of the games and come for us in numbers." Marisol pressed the rag doll to her lips. "Then we'll fight every day until they learn what hope can do." Across town, the stranger oversaw preparations. Trenches knifed into the plaza, wagons chained across narrow alleys, roofs reinforced for sharpshooters. Children and elders huddled in the cellar beneath the saloon. Isaiah Montez humming prayers against panic. By dusk, Loma Perdita was encircled once more. Torches blazed at the perimeter, the red spurs arrayed like black blossoms in the dying light. Their leader, Silas Cullen, spurred his horse forward, rifle resting on his knee. Marisol stood sentinel by the south barricade, rag doll at her side. The night air crackled with tension, the hush before the storm. Silas raised his voice. "Ortega, bring forth your doll's mistress and her mother, or we burn this place to the ground." Marisol's rifle felt like an extension of her will. She stepped onto the barricade, voice carrying, "You want us? Come and take us. But the doll stays, and you'll taste dirt before blood." Silas laughed, low and hollow, bold words for a broken town. He signaled, and horns bellowed. Men filed forward, bayonets gleaming. Marisol glanced at Lucas. His nod was slow, sure, resolute. She returned the rag doll to her arms, then raised her rifle. "Aim for the leader," she said. "Take him down, and they'll scatter." The first volley shattered night's stillness, a storm of rifles, the rat-tat of revolvers. Loma Perdita's defenders fell in calculated rhythm, each shot pealing like a prayer. Suddenly, a lantern arced across the street, thrown by the stranger at Silas's flank. The outlaw leader reeled, hat brim tumbling, revealing eyes wide with shock. "Now, Marisol!" Lucas roared. Marisol's finger tightened. She exhaled as rifle fired a single shot through flickering lantern smoke. Silas slumped forward, the lantern's ghostly glow reflecting off his bloodied chest. The red spurs faltered, confusion crashing over them like broken glass. "Push!" Marisol cried. Loma Perdita surged. Volunteers lifted rifles, ran forward. Deputies clashed with bayonets. The saloon balcony rained musket fire. All at once, the siege ended. Silas Cullen's body at the barricade, second in command surrendering. With empty hands raised high, Marisol watched him fall, chest pounding. She pressed the rag doll to her heart, tears carving bright trails in the lantern's glow. Neighbors emerged from shadow, trembling but alive, children clutching rag dolls of their own, mothers blind with relief. Lucas helped her down from the barricade. "You did it again," he gasped. Marisol met his gaze, voice steady as steel. "We did it together." The stranger approached, hat in hand. "Loma Perdita stands tonight because of trust and promise," he said softly. "Your rag doll's power was never in coin, but in the hope it carried." Marisol lifted the doll, holding it high. "Hope endures." The broken town exhaled a battered chorus of healing voices. And beneath the moon's pale smile, Marisol Ortega realized that no matter how many debts darkness demanded, heart and courage could always pay the final price. A pale sliver of moon hung above Loma Perdita as Marisol Ortega rose once more, The rag doll nestled in her arms like a ward of fragile light. The town lay silent under the guard of makeshift barricades and vigilant eyes, but Marisol felt the weight of what lay ahead, the looming threat of Blackwood's vengeance. Hungry for retribution, Lucas Cruz found her on the porch, rifle slung across his back. "We ride at first light," he said, voice low. "We strike their main camp, dismantle their command." Marisol nodded, tucking the doll into her satchel alongside the locket. "No mercy this time," her words rang with bitter resolve. "They've taken enough." Isabel Montes appeared in the doorway, hands clasped beneath her apron. "May your aim be true," she whispered, pressing a small satchel of powdered salve into Marisol's hand. "And your heart steady." Marisol offered a grateful smile. "Thank you. We'll finish this so no one else falls." Dawn's first gray light found their small company, Marisol, Lucas, the stranger, and half a dozen deputies creeping out of town toward the ridge trail. The valley below lay shrouded in mist, ghosts of wounded hopes drifting between pines. The Blackwood camp sat at the basin's edge, wagons lined like coffins, tents clustered around a roaring fire. Silas Cullen sat atop a makeshift dais flanked by his lieutenant, Raphael Moranti, knuckles wrapped in blood-stained tape and a dozen hardened men. Marisol set her mare behind a fallen log. Lucas and the men followed suit. She grasped the rifle, heart hammering, and motioned to the stranger. He handed her a folded parchment. Their positions, crossfire zones. Aim for Cullen. Without him, they fall apart. She studied the map then, met his weathered gaze, understood. With synchronized calm, the group advanced through the underbrush, the mist swallowing their figures. Each step was a drumbeat in the prelude to war. They reached the camp's perimeter as the first bell of morning tolled an old miner's alarm warning. The outlaws scrambled, rifles barking into the haze. Lucas unleashed a hail of bullets at the tents, sending men sprawling. Deputies cut off retreat routes. The stranger moved through the chaos with deadly grace. Pistol flashing. Mabra Isol sprinted toward the dais, salve satchel thumping against her side. The rag doll's button eyes peeked from her coat, a silent promise driving her forward. She vaulted over a fallen rider, rifle raised. Silas Cullen whirled, surprise flickering in his eyes. "Ortega!" he roared, leveling his pistol. Their eyes locked, two wills forged in fire and loss. Marisol's finger found the trigger. Time slowed. The rag doll's gaze guided her aim. The shot cracked the dawn, a single bullet cleaving wind and fear alike. Silas's pistol clattered to the ground as he staggered, clutching his shoulder. He fell from the dais like a broken statue. "Moranti!" roared, launching himself at Marisol. She sidestepped, salve in hand, and struck him across the face. He wavered, fury twisting his features. Lucas tackled him from behind, cuffs snapping around his wrists. The stranger intercepted Blackwood's remaining men, delivering swift justice with equal parts force and mercy. Chaos melted into surrender. Outlaws dropped rifles, raising hands in defeat. The sun rose, gilding the mist with hope. Marisol approached Silas Cullen, rifle butt in hand. He lay on the blood-soaked ground, eyes dim with pain and defeat. "It's over," she said softly, kneeling beside him. "Let hope, not vengeance, shape tomorrow." Silas's laughter was ragged. "Hope's for fools." Marisol pressed the rag doll to his chest. "Maybe, but it's the only currency that lasts." The first rays of sun broke through the pines, illuminating the basin in gold. Lucas and the deputies rounded up the prisoners. The stranger approached, his scar soft in morning light. "Loma Perdita is safe," he declared, "because you dared to carry hope beyond these mountains." Marisol stood, the rag doll cradled in her arms. "We all did together." Behind them, the valley exhaled. The rag doll's button eyes gleamed, reflecting the dawn. And in that light, Marisol Ortega knew that even in lands forgotten by time, a single promise could stand against the darkest storm and prevail. Marisol Ortega crouched atop the ridge overlooking the scorched basin where Blackwood's camp smoldered from last night's raid. Dawn's pale light revealed half-buried wagons, shredded tent flaps, and scattered campfires reduced to embers. The rag doll lay in her lap, its button eyes staring emptily toward the horizon. Lucas Cruz settled beside her, rifle cradled in one arm. "We did what we could," he murmured, voice rough with fatigue. Marisol pressed her lips to the doll's. "Frayed ear, we've bought ourselves time." She scanned the valley floor tracks of gaunt men fleeing eastward, wheels gouged deep furrows in the clay. Every hoofprint and wheel rut signaled another threat driving away, but the basin was alien now, its silence a testament to their victory and a warning of reprisals yet to come. Below, Isabel Montez's silhouette appeared at the cabin door, a dark sentinel against pale dawn. She waved, and Marisol nodded, steeling herself for the next phase of their campaign. They descended the ridge. Rag Doll packed safely away and rode back into Loma Perdita under the banner of uneasy relief. The town-stirred volunteers hauled fresh water to wash the blood from walls. Deputies escorted captured outlaws into makeshift cells, and children peered from shuttered windows. Marisol's mother sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, weakness etched into every line of her face. Yet her eyes glimmered with gratitude when she saw Marisol approach. Marisol dismounted and knelt, cradling her mother's hand. "You kept your promise," her mother whispered. Mariso well smiled wearily. "As I always will." They lingered only a moment before the distant echo of hoofbeats cut through the morning air. Once more, Marisol's heart clenched. Inside the saloon, the stranger gathered men around the battered map. His voice was urgent. "Blackwood's forces are consolidating north of the pass. They'll circle around and attack from the west by nightfall." Marisol and Lucas joined the meeting. The room fell silent at their entrance. The rag doll's presence at Marisol's side commanded a hush. "Tonight," the stranger continued, "we divide. A contingent will cover the western ridge, harass their flanks as they march. The rest will hold the town. Marisol will lead the flank assault." Marisol nodded, voice steady. "We strike before darkness falls. We hit them hard and disappear before they know what hit them." Isabel pressed a vial of peppermint oil into Marisol's hand. "For your blade when knives speak louder than rifles." Marisol tucked the oil into her belt. "Thank you." Dusk found Marisol silhouetted against blood-red skies, the rag doll's shadow flickering beside her. She crept along the western ridge, rifle ready, Lucas and 6 volunteers at her back. Each step was silent as a falling star death stalking. Between the pines below, Blackwood's men marched in rigid formation, drums pounding a warbeat. Their banners snapped in the wind, crimson skulls against black, a promise of carnage. Marisol raised a gloved hand. "Wait for my mark." The volunteers melted into the underbrush. Lucas crouched at her side, face hidden beneath war paint. Then Marisol dropped her hand. Volunteers sprang from hiding, rifles spitting fire, arrows whistling overhead. Chaos erupted. Blackwood's men spun, swords flashing. Along the ridge, steel ran against rock as volunteers engaged in brutal close quarters. Skirmishes. Lucas shouted orders, pulling wounded comrades back before pressing forward. Marisol lunged toward their rearguard. Her blade dripping peppermint oil glowed in the torchlight. She disarmed 2 men before an arrow grazed her arm, the rag doll's. Image flashed in her mind, a reminder of what she fought for. She pressed on, blade carving a path of desperate resistance. But Blackwood's lieutenant, Rafael Knuckles Morante, delivered a crushing blow that sent Marisol sprawling into the dust. Her rifle skidded away, the ridge's darkness swallowing it whole. Morante loomed, fist clenched. Marisol crawled backward, heart pounding like war drums. She clutched her side where blood seared beneath her shirt. Then a rifle crack cut through the tumult, silencing Moranti's advance. Lucas's voice rang out, "Don't touch her!" Moranti staggered, clutching the smoking wound in his shoulder. He snarled, then turned and vanished into the gloom. Marisol struggled to her feet. Lucas knelt, pressing a handkerchief to her wound. Pain flared, but her spirit remained unbowed. "We did it," Lucas panted. "But they'll regroup, attack the town while we're exposed." Marisol pressed her hand to the handkerchief. "Then we lead them where we want them." She rose, gazing at the distant glow of torches approaching the ridge's base. Blackwood's reinforcements. The ragdoll's presence at her waist felt, heavier now laden with every soul's hope carried through war's fury. As the first wave of Blackwood's men crested the ridge, Marisol raised her blade and let out a cry that split the night. Behind her, volunteers surged forward once more, the ragdoll's silent promise echoing in every steadfast heart. And below, Loma Perdita held its breath ready to stand or fall, bound by the courage of one girl who believed a promise could defy the darkness. Marisol Ortega stood at the threshold of dawn's first pale light, the rag doll secured in her satchel beside the leather-wrapped ledger and the marshal's heart-shaped locket. The air was crisp with morning's promise, yet her soul thrummed with the memory of last night's violence, the red spurs ambush on the ridge, the sting of the bullet that grazed her mare's flank, and the desperate flight that followed. Lucas Cruz reined in his mare beside her, breath pluming in the chill. His gaze, once fierce with protective fire, now softened with concern. "We made it," he murmured. Marisol exhaled, pressing a hand to her side where Moranti's blade had torn flesh. The wound throbbed beneath her tunic, a red reminder that hope had a price. She glanced at the old healer's cabin perched on the meadow's edge. Isabel Montez's refuge nestled among pines, smoke curling above its battered roof. "Ma's waiting," Marisol said. "Isabel needs time to prepare the serum." They rode across the meadow, the wildflowers swaying like silent witnesses. Each hoofbeat was a heartbeat, each breath a testament to survival. The mare, still limping, moved with labored grace. At the cabin door, Isabel emerged, her rough-hewn shawl wrapped tight. She took one swift look at Marisol's blood-stained sleeve and Lucas's tense stance, then motioned them inside. "Quickly," Isabel instructed, voice hushed but urgent. "We have less than 2 hours before the fever takes root again." The compound. "I need must brew in sunlight yarrow, poppy petals, and the rare moon moss found only in the canyon's shadows." Marisol set the rag doll gently on the table beside a heap of dried herbs. Its button eyes gleamed in the lantern's glow. Lucas lifted the doll, examining its frayed seams as though seeking counsel in its patchwork heart. "We'll gather the moon moss," he said. "At sundown," Isabel cautioned, "when the moss opens to the lunar light. Until then, we grind what we have and let the fever burn until it weakens its grip." Marisol nodded, determination coalescing in her chest. "We'll be ready." Outside, she stepped onto the porch, the rag doll cradled in her arms. The world seemed too bright, too calm for the storm that threatened Loma Perdita. She fingered the doll's stitched mouth, remembering her mother's laugh, soft and lilting, a lullaby against the dark. Behind her, Lucas joined, rifle slung. "I'll scout the canyon for the moss." Marisol glanced toward the narrow path leading southwest, treacherous but swift. "Be careful." Her voice was a whisper lost in the breeze. He nodded and mounted. She watched him disappear down the trail, dust swirling in his wake. Mariso descended to the meadow, the rag doll pressed to her heart. Each step she took carried the weight of every promise made, the lullaby her mother sang, the mercy the stranger extended, the justice the marshal wielded, and the hope sewn into every stitch of this tattered doll. She paused at the field's edge, turning back to the cabin where Isabel already measured ground herbs in a battered mortar. Lucas's silhouette, vanished among the pines. Beyond, the distant peaks loomed, dark guardians of the canyon that held the moon-moss. Marisoul inhaled the dawn's crisp air and steeled herself. The rag doll's button eyes seemed to shine with silent encouragement. Go, protect, believe. She climbed back onto her mare, voice soft. Let's make our own dawn together. And with that vow, Marisol Ortega rode toward the canyon's shadowed Morag doll at her side, heart aflame, ready to face whatever darkness lay ahead. Marisol Ortega stood at the threshold of dawn's first pale light, the rag doll secured in her satchel beside the leather-wrapped ledger and the marshal's heart-shaped locket. The air was crisp with morning's promise, yet her soul thrummed. With the memory of last night's violence, the red spur's ambush on the ridge, the sting of the bullet that grazed her mare's flank, and the desperate flight that followed. Lucas Cruz reined in his mare beside her, breath pluming in the chill. His gaze, once fierce with protective fire, now softened with concern. We made it, he murmured. Emma, our ISO, exhaled, pressing a hand to her side where Morante's blade had torn flesh. The wound throbbed beneath her tunic, a red reminder that hope had a price. She glanced at the old healer's cabin perched on the meadow's edge, Isabel Montez's refuge nestled among pines, smoke curling above its battered roof. Ma's waiting, Marisol said. Isabel needs time to prepare the serum. They rode across the meadow, the wildflowers swaying like silent witnesses. Each hoofbeat was a heartbeat, each breath a testament to survival. The mare, still limping, moved with labored grace. At the cabin door, Isabel emerged, her rough-hewn shawl wrapped tight. She took one swift look at Marisol's blood-stained sleeve and Lucas's tense stance, then motioned them inside. Quickly, Isabel instructed, voice hushed but urgent. We have less than 2 hours before the fever takes root again. The compound. I need must brew in sunlight yarrow, poppy petals, and the rare moon moss found only in the canyon shadows. Marisol set the rag doll gently on the table beside a heap of dried herbs. Its button eyes gleamed in the lantern's glow. Lucas lifted the doll, examining its frayed seams as though seeking counsel in its patchwork heart. We'll gather the moon moss, he said. At sundown, Isabel cautioned, when the moss opens to the lunar light. Until then, we grind what we have and let the fever burn, until it weakens its grip. Marisol nodded, determination coalescing in her chest. We'll be ready. Outside, she stepped onto the porch, the rag doll cradled in her arms. The world seemed too bright, too calm for the storm that threatened Loma Perdita. She fingered the doll's stitched mouth, remembering her mother's laugh soft and lilting, a lullaby against the dark. Behind her, Lucas joined, rifle slung. I'll scout the canyon for the moss. Marisol glanced toward the narrow path leading. Southwest, treacherous but swift. Be careful. Her voice was a whisper lost in the breeze. He nodded and mounted. She watched him disappear down the trail, dust swirling in his wake. Marisol descended to the meadow, the rag doll pressed to her heart. Each step she took carried the weight of every promise made, the lullaby her mother sang, the mercy the stranger extended, the justice the marshal wielded, and the hope sewn into every stitch of this tattered doll. She paused at the field's edge, turning back to the cabin where Isabel already measured ground herbs in a battered mortar. Lucas's silhouette vanished among the pines. Beyond, the distant peaks loomed, dark guardians of the canyon that held the moon-moss. Marisol inhaled the dawn's crisp air and steeled herself. The rag doll's button eyes seemed to shine with silent encouragement. Go, protect, believe. She climbed back onto her mare, voice soft. Let's make our own dawn together. And with that vow, Marisol Ortega rode toward the canyon's shadowed Morag doll at her side, heart aflame, ready to face whatever darkness lay ahead. The dawn that broke over Whisper Valley felt different, lighter, charged with the promise of finality. Marisol Ortega stood on the porch of her mother's homestead. The rag doll nestled in her arms, its mismatched button eyes reflecting the soft gold of morning. Every breath she drew carried the memory of the battles fought, the debts paid in blood and hope, and the fragile life she had vowed to protect. Below, Loma Perdita stirred to silent life, the hammer of the blacksmith striking. Fresh iron, children's laughter trailing like birdsong, and volunteers already repairing barricades along the town's edge. The marshal's star gleamed at the sheriff's office, a testament to the law's promise and to Marisol's unyielding courage. But before all that, there remained one final reckoning, the ruins of Blackwood's stronghold where Silas Cullen and his gang had entrenched themselves in a network of abandoned mines and collapsed tunnels, trusting darkness to safeguard their vengeance. Marisol had tracked them here, guided by whispered counsel from her rescuing stranger. A cunning raid, swift and decisive, would end the threat once and for all. Lucas Cruz joined her at the homestead gate, rifle in hand, eyes bright with the urgency of the moment. Isabel Montez hovered nearby, herbs strapped across her satchel, ready to heal old wounds or new. The marshal himself arrived on horseback, ledger and locket secured at his belt, nodding to Marisol with solemn pride. "It's time," the marshal said, voice steady. "Let's finish this." Marisol nodded, clutching the rag doll's hand-stitched skirt. "For Ma, for everyone." They rode east beyond the orchard glades, where fruit trees bowed beneath the weight of ripening bounty. The trail climbed toward the foothills, pines whispering warnings overhead. Each hoof beat echoed across the valley, an invocation of determination. And dread at the canyon's mouth, the party dismounted. Shadows pooled like spilled ink along the rock faces. Into that darkness, Silas's men had disappeared, confident in their subterranean stronghold. But confidence had a price. Marisol's heart pounded as she led the way toward the mine. Entrance razor-edged icicles dripping from the beams, the stench of damp earth and stale sweat thick as a shroud. The rag doll's button eyes gleamed in. The lantern's glow, a fragile defiance against the deep gloom. They entered as one. Lucas covering her flank, the marshal bringing up the rear, deputies and volunteers fanning out into silent precision. Isabel moved close, talisman at the ready. The tunnels twisted like a labyrinth of old regrets. Every footstep clattered across loose stones, sending echoes through the cavern's belly. Marisol's pulse raced memories of gunfire, of dear friends. Lost, fueling her resolve. Then came the sound, muted shouts in the metallic ring of steel. They pressed forward, rifles raised. A group of outlaws emerged from a side shaft, rifles leveled in surprise. Marisol stepped into the center, rag doll held aloft. "Your outlaw ways end here," she declared, voice ringing clear. "Surrender, and no further blood need be shed." Silas Cullen himself stepped forward, gaunt and broken, his once fiery eyes dimmed by fatigue and disappointment. He spat at the ground, then laughed a hollow, broken thing. "You think a rag doll and an army of smiles can stop me?" He snarled. Marisol's gaze never wavered. "It's not the doll, it's the promise stitched into its seams. And the promise I carry in my heart." Silas raised his pistol, but the marshal's shot cracked the air first, the bullet snapping Silas's weapon from his hand. Lucas moved in, rifle butt knocking the outlaw to the ground. Volunteers cuffed the gang. No blood spilled in the final moment of confrontation. Silence fell. The stench of fear gave way to the breath of relief. Marisol approached Silas's prone form, rag doll in hand. She knelt wherever she stood, the lantern's glow revealing every scar on his face. "This ends now," she said softly. "Vengeance dies when mercy lives." Silas curled in on himself, gaze darting to the doll's innocent face. At last he whispered, I yield." Marisol closed her eyes, releasing an exhale that carried the weight of every battle fought. She placed the rag doll beside him, its button eyes staring into his as the light of hope rekindled in the darkness. The ride back home was quiet. Loma Perdita emerged like an oasis from the canyon's homes intact, smoke curling from chimneys, the promise of dawn painting every rooftop dot at the homestead porch. Marisol dismounted, rag doll held out to the marshal. He took it gently, as one might cradle a rare bloom. "You've done more than defend your town," he said quietly. "You taught it to believe again." Marisol's lips curved in a soft smile. "We all did, together." The marshal tipped his hat and rode off, leaving the ledger and locket at her feet. A final charge to carry hope forward. As the sun climbed, Isabel placed her hand on Marisol's shoulder. Lucas fell in beside them, the three of them forming a silent circle around the rag doll. And there, in the golden light of new beginnings, Marisol Ortega spoke the vow that had guided her from the start. The rag doll's button eyes glittered in the sun, its frayed edges a testament to every trial overcome. And as Whisper Valley breathed its first breath of dawn, Marisol knew the greatest battles were not fought in dark canyons, but in the promise we keep and the hope we carry. One rag doll, one brave heart at a time. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.